The creak of a rusty door broke the silence in Mr. Jameson's house. With a rough motion, he tossed an empty bowl into the corner where Shadow used to wait for his food. The dog, thin and weary-eyed, approached slowly, barely wagging his tail, only to find a few crumbs of stale bread. "There, that's all you're getting. Stop bothering me," Jameson grumbled in a harsh tone before sinking into his worn-out armchair. Shadow, still hungry, retreated to the dark corner where he usually hid, lowering his head as if he understood the rejection. Across town, Lily ran barefoot through the dusty streets, chasing a small makeshift ball. While she played, she overheard Mrs. Carter complaining loudly near the local grocery store. "That man has no heart. Poor animal, starving to death in that house. Someone should report him." The words stuck with Lily as she listened to the murmurs of the gathered women. "We can't just let it happen," one added. Curious, Lily approached her grandfather, Mr. Adams, resting under the shade of a tree in the town square. "Why are they talking about Mr. Jameson like that, Grandpa?" she asked, sitting beside him. Mr. Adams sighed deeply before replying. "It's an old story, Lily. That man wasn't always like this, but life hit him hard. He lost his family in an accident years ago, and since then he's been trapped in his sorrow. That dog, it's all he has left, but even that seems too much for him to care for." Through a small gap in the fence, she saw Shadow curled up on the ground. "Poor thing," she murmured, extending the bread and blanket toward him. Shadow lifted his head, sniffed the air, and hesitated for a moment before approaching. His movements were unsteady, as if hunger had sapped his strength. Lily gently stroked his rough fur. "I'll help you, I promise," she whispered before running back home, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, from his window, Mr. Jameson silently watched. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the girl, but he did nothing. He simply closed the curtains abruptly and retreated to his dark corner. The next morning, whispers filled Meadow Springs as the sun rose. "Mr. Jameson's dog was wandering the square all night," the townsfolk said. Lily heard the comments as she walked to the market with her mother, her heart racing. How had Shadow escaped the house? Without hesitation, she dropped the bread she was carrying and ran toward the town square. There he was. Shadow, trembling as he walked, was near the gazebo, trying to chew on a discarded orange peel. The dog looked even weaker than the night before, as if the effort to leave the house had drained him completely. Lily knelt in front of him, pulling a piece of tortilla from her pocket. "Here, Shadow. This will help," she whispered. The dog ate eagerly as she gently stroked his fur. Her actions didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Carter, always observant, spotted her from the store's entrance. "Lily, that dog shouldn't be wandering around. It's dangerous. He might be sick," she shouted, approaching quickly. Shadow, hearing the harsh tone, backed away fearfully. "He's not sick, just hungry," Lily said firmly, shielding the dog with her small frame. Mrs. Carter huffed, but didn't argue further. Instead, she went back to her shop and began gathering other neighbors, insisting on action. "If Mr. Jameson doesn't want him, we'll take him to the shelter. It's for the best," she declared, quickly gaining support. Lily felt a knot in her stomach. "They're not taking him," she thought, as she led Shadow to a secluded alley. That afternoon, while hiding the dog in an old crate behind her house, Lily confided in her grandfather. "Grandpa, if I let them take him, they'll treat him like trash," she said tearfully. Mr. Adams looked at her with concern, but also with pride. "You're brave, kiddo, but this won't be easy. If you're going to care for that dog, you'll face more than just gossip." Jameson sat in his chair, a bottle in hand. Shadow was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Lily demanded from the doorway, not bothering to hide her presence. Jameson raised his bloodshot eyes, filled with anger and exhaustion. "What are you doing here, kid? That dog isn't your concern." He simply looked away, gesturing for her to leave. As Lily walked away, she vowed not to rest until she found Shadow. The morning sun barely peeked over the hills when the sound of a bell startled the residents of Meadow Springs. It was Mrs. Carter walking through the streets, ringing an old bronze bell. "That dog's loose again. We can't allow this," she shouted, gathering a small crowd. Among them was Mr. Ramsey, the local shelter manager, who agreed to take charge of the situation. Hiding around the corner, Lily listened with her heart pounding. She didn't know where Shadow was, but she knew if Mr. Ramsey got to him, his fate would be sealed. Determined, she ran to find her grandfather. She found him in his workshop and poured out the story between tears. "Grandpa, if we don't do something, they'll take him. We can't let them." Mr. Adams looked at her calmly, though worry flickered in his eyes. "Don't worry, kiddo. We'll find him before they do." Before she could reach him, a group of townsfolk, led by Mrs. Carter and Mr. Ramsey, turned the corner. "There he is! Make sure to catch him," Mrs. Carter ordered. Lily stood in front of Shadow, spreading her arms like a shield. "Don't touch him! He's not doing anything wrong!" she yelled. The air grew tense as neighbors argued. Some supported Lily, recalling Mr. Adams's wisdom and kindness, while others insisted the dog was a danger. Then, to everyone's surprise, a figure emerged from the distance. It was Mr. Jameson, walking with determined steps toward the group. The murmurs stopped. Mr. Jameson, with his usual grim expression, stood before Lily and looked at Shadow. The dog, weak but loyal, raised his head and let out a small whine. Jameson sighed heavily. "That dog is mine," he declared firmly. "He doesn't need to go anywhere." "You've let him starve. This isn't just about you anymore." But Jameson didn't respond. Instead, he knelt beside Shadow and for the first time in years, stroked the dog's coarse fur with a trembling hand. "He's mine," he repeated, this time with a softer tone. The crowd fell silent. Lily stood still, hardly believing what she saw. Mr. Jameson, the town's most hardened man, seemed to break before their eyes. Finally, Mr. Adams spoke, breaking the tension. "If he's willing to take care of him, we should give him that chance. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." For the first time, it felt like something in Meadow Springs had changed, and perhaps, just maybe, there was a new beginning for both man and dog.